Own the Road with Kelly and Bob, the USA 250 Tour, celebrating America.
We, the people of the United States of America.
Hi, and thanks for joining us for this edition of On the Road with Kelly and Bob, the USA 250 Tour. I'm Kelly Phillips.
And I'm Bob Phillips. One of the fun things we've been running into during our travels around every state this year is a look back at how we got to where we are. From the stories of the original colonies, to the Declaration of Independence, to the Industrial Revolution, to our modern times, and everything in between. It's been interesting, to say the least, to see how we as a people and a nation have arrived here today.
I especially liked revisiting the stories of how things have changed over the years. And we'll be talking today about one of the biggest changes in our lives, well, since the beginning of time, the ability to take to the skies and travel the world.
Our story this week is about a place in the Seattle, Washington area, and a guy who is absolutely living his most fantastic dream.
I never would have predicted that I would be here, let alone some of the other places that I've been. But I'm originally from Spokane, Washington, born and raised there. And I'm one of those kids that grew up looking at airplanes. You know, as far back as I can remember, plane flies overhead, I'm looking around. And that probably came from my dad. He was a pilot before he got married, and so he's, World War II era. He worked on B-17s during World War II, and so of course I grew up thinking the B-17 is the greatest plane ever made. So the interest goes way back there.
From the time he could safely walk on the ground beneath him, Ted Hutter had his eyes on the clouds. He's one of those people who has never ceased to marvel that after eons of dreaming about it, mankind finally figured out how to fly.
Okay, so we can't exactly imitate the birds, but in some ways it might be even better because thanks to advancements in airplanes over the years, we can now explore our planet and be almost anywhere on it in less than a day. Do you remember your first time that you even rode on an airplane?
Oh, yeah. So my dad worked for a lumber company, and the company had a couple small planes. So my first airplane ride was in one of those. It was the Cessna 180, and we flew to Idaho. Dad took me out of school that day. He said, "This is important."
Ted Hutter always knew what the future held for him. Somehow he would live his life among the clouds, flying high above the earth and dreaming of distant lands and faraway places.
And even though the road that finally got him to where he wanted to go was slightly circuitous, today he is living the life amongst the greatest collection of flying machines anywhere on our planet.
We are at Museum of Flight. It's not quite an original name. There's probably half a dozen other museums of flight around the world. But this one, we're in Seattle, Washington at Boeing Field. We're not a Boeing museum. Say that right away because we're often confused as the Boeing Museum of Flight. We probably have the largest collection of Boeing anywhere in the world. We're at Boeing Field. There was a lot of aviation in the early part of the 20th century in the Northeast, New England and New York. But probably the main base for aviation was in Southern California. I mean, you had the top people move there, or if they weren't already there, like the Lockheed brothers, Jack Northrop, Stearman was there, Donald Douglas. The difference is that Bill Boeing, his family was from Michigan, I believe, so He, as a young man, he came to the Northwest. He decides, let's start an aviation business with a few of his friends. There was a shipyard just a couple miles from here on the Duwamish River, which is probably a quarter of a mile from where we sit. There's a shipyard that made his yacht. And, you know, in World War I, well, there wasn't much business for the shipyard at that time. People were concentrating on other things. So the shipyard was barely struggling along, and he offers to, well, I'll buy the shipyard. Let's start making airplanes.
Ted Hutter manages public relations here at the Museum of Flight. He spent years working in various jobs, all related somehow to his love of airplanes, even working at NASA for a while.
Now he's in his dream job, telling the stories of how we have gone from the first Wright brothers flight to landing on the moon and beyond. And nothing pleases him more than to show off his Museum of Flight.
One person came in here one day about a year ago, and she had no interest in aviation. She was part of a group that was just touring the place. And she got done looking at our largest gallery, and she's going, I've never seen such a representation of how to think creatively in different ways to get the same thing done. In our World War I gallery, there's a JN-4, nicknamed Jenny. It was the American entry into World War I aircraft. By that time, by the end of World War I, the U.S. still really didn't have a modern airplane. Modern aviation started in Europe. You know, it's like we invented the idea, but the Europeans really took it and developed it in all kinds of ways very quickly. But we had this one training aircraft, the Jenny, and thousands of them were made. We've got an example of a DC-2 and a DC-3, and those are planes that really advanced air travel, because up until then, so we're talking about 1935, most people that traveled by airplane, you could call them more of an adventurer than anything else. With the DC-3, now you've got something that is comfortable. You know, it's an all-metal airplane. It's fast, it's cruising at speeds that were much faster than the previous planes. It's really reliable technology of that time, the engines, the airframe, everything about it made it kind of the first of the really reliable sort of airliner. When you look at what Boeing was producing in the 1950s and 60s, it's pretty astonishing, the impact that their planes had around the world, beginning with the 707. That's the first really successful jet airliner, and that changed everything. Now you've got an airplane that can cruise at 500 plus miles an hour versus 300 plus, and it's smooth and it's comfortable. So that changed everything in air travel. And then in the early 60s, you have the 727. Not a radical change, but it made a pretty significant change, is that now you've got a smaller jetliner, and it is designed in a way that can take off and land in smaller airports. So it brought the jet age to small towns all over the world.
Come to the Museum of Flight in Washington State, and you will witness one of the greatest stories of mankind's achievements over our years on this planet.
From early humans staring at the birds and wondering how they do what they do, to our most recent explorations of our universe, a tour of this place will leave you with a sense of wonder.
It's that sense of wonder that brought Ted Hutter all the way from that little boy skipping school with his dad so he could take his first ride on an airplane to the guy who gets to tell the amazing story of flight over and over again. For Ted, it's a story of hope and wonder.
What advice would you give to somebody who has never been on an airplane?
Look out the window. Get a window seat.
And for me, getting to soak up Ted Hutter's love of all things having to do with flying was as exciting as seeing everything there is to see at the Museum of Flight. This guy is what I call eat up with it. And it's refreshing to meet someone who still loves something today as much as he did when he was a little kid.
Let's continue our conversation with Ted, starting with a little more about his own story.
I was also lucky that I grew up during the beginning of the space age. The space race to the moon was a big part of my life. What else would a boy want, you know?
Did you want to be an astronaut?
Of course, but I also realized by the 4th grade, I started wearing glasses, and I knew that astronauts and test pilots and those people didn't wear glasses. So I think that was always in the back of my head that that's not going to happen. But I always wanted to be a pilot, though. So the first thing that I did when I got out of college is that I went back to Idaho to get my private pilot's license. Now I could spend money on something I wanted to do. It wasn't just a school project. I spent that summer flying a J3 Cub. That's the reason why I went to that airport. It was a place called Henley Aerodrome. It was a tiny airport in North Idaho it probably had twice as many wings than airplanes. So it's that kind of a place. It was old airplanes and people that loved them. And it's the only place I knew where you could learn how to fly in like the 1940s era J3 Piper Cub, just like my dad did.
And that's what you were aiming for, wasn't it? Just like Dad did.
That had something to do with it because I grew up with the stories and that type of flying. I took a temporary, it was supposed to be a summer job at a glider port a couple hours north of Los Angeles in the southern Sierra there. And that job lasted 4 years. I was towing gliders and giving glider rides. And it was just the most fantastic piloting experience you can imagine.
You were pulling the gliders
Yeah.
to get them up in the air and then releasing them and letting them glide.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's hands-on stick and rudder flying every flight, and you make literally thousands of them every year. And it's exciting because the type of weather that glider pilots like is the type of weather that most airplane pilots avoid. You know, if it's windy, if it's hot and bumpy. Thermals, yeah. So all the types of weather that most pilots want to avoid. Oh, it's going to be too bumpy. It's too windy. You know, that's what we were flying in. So it was a great experience.
And then what?
I got offered a job at NASA Dryden Flight Research Center. It's now called NASA Armstrong Flight Research Center, but it's NASA's main aeronautical flight test center. So got a job there. They needed a writer. And working for public affairs, history, that transitioned into a lot of NASA education. So I worked on a lot of NASA education materials that went all over the country. So that was fantastic. And for a pilot, working at Edwards Air Force Base, that's like working at Disneyland. But it's literally the land of the right stuff. Yeah. That's where it all happened. It happened at Edwards. That's where they first broke the sound barrier, and Mach 2 and Mach 3, and tested all the new exotic airplanes. And that's why NASA was there. So it was always a part of that. So, and that's why when we first started flying the Space Shuttle, it was done there because they had the facilities for it. It really was started by a group of Boeing folks way back when. In 1965, and they wanted to do something about preserving Northwest aviation history. One of these persons heard about this airplane in Anchorage that was spotted in the city dump, and it was this huge old Boeing biplane. It's called the Model 80A. And it was an airliner of the late 20s and early 30s. And it made its way up there decades before that as another bush plane in Alaska. And when they were done with it, it's like, okay, we're done. Take it to the dump.
So it's sitting
it was sitting there rotting away. A local kind of rescued it from the dump. And that restoration project really was the beginning of the Museum of Flight. And it's one of the centerpieces in our main gallery, the Great Gallery.
Okay, so we asked Ted to point out some of the greatest advances in air travel over the years, and he had one particular favorite.
It's the very first 747. It's the prototype. It was never used as an airliner. Boeing always used it as a test airplane for about 20 years until they gave it to the museum. But its impact on the world it's really hard to assess because it changed air travel really completely at that time. Because up until then, we're talking about the late 1960s, early 70s, air travel, it was popular, but it was still relatively expensive. But what happened with the 747 is that now you've got a plane, totally modern airplane, that is twice as large as the largest jet aircraft at that time, jet airliner. And
it's a game changer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because now you've got something that flies just as fast, it is actually faster. Here's some of the surprises of that airplane is that a lot of people were wondering how it can even fly. People looked at that plane on the ground and wondered, will it even fly? So they've got a winning design that now you can, if you're carrying 400 people, versus 200 people for the same distance, you can charge less and still earn a lot of money for your airline. It's accessible to people that never would have considered flying before. We're at the beginning of, I think, a new technology, a new period of technology in air travel. I think the days of the gasoline-powered or diesel-powered engines is coming to an end. But I think there will be a time when people are going to wonder, wow, this airplane's powered by hydrogen now. When did that happen? I don't think the shapes aren't going to be changing an awful lot. There's a few interesting designs underway right now that will look totally different. But I think the biggest technological change is going to be in propulsion. Sort of like we started out with small gasoline engines. It went from that to jet propulsion, and the jet propulsion has become more and more efficient. What will be changing after that is that now those engines will be powered by hydrogen or electricity, that sort of thing.
Here's the Great Gallery. It's kind of a mixed bag, but it's a look at kind of the first 100 years of flying. So this is an example of a Lockheed Blackbird. We only made about 3 dozen of them. It cruised at over 3 times speed of sound at over 80,000 feet. So the pilot and the systems operator behind him were wearing spacesuits at the time, usually flying top secret flights over Soviet Union or wherever we needed information, throughout the 60s. This is the other one I wanted to point out because it's the opposite of this. This flies about as slowly as you can fly. It's pedal powered. Now we're into mid-1930s and metal's taken over. This plane is pretty much a duplicate of Amelia Earhart's plane. Same kind of plane. It's Lockheed Model 10 Electra. Got a lot of Pete Conrad stuff here. His widow has donated a huge part of his collection. We're able to tell a story of Apollo through one person. He was amazing. He flew everything except Mercury. You've got most of that whole program told through Pete Conrad's story. This is where I used to work. Edwards Air Force Base. I was there in the mid-90s to early 2000s. Some of the people that worked on X-15 were still around at that time and still working. So for someone like me, who was a kid growing up reading about them, in Popular Mechanics and magazines like that, National Geographic, and now I'm working with them, I'm meeting them. That was a big deal. And here's the Queen of the Skies, City of Everett, Dakota Type 747. This is the way it was painted when it was first rolled out. So it had all those logos on it because those were the original airlines that signed up for this plane.
What do you think about when you're flying?
All sorts of things. I think when I'm best at it, I'm thinking about where I am in relationship to the whole environment. It's not so much of looking down, it's looking out. So you're part of this other world that most people just sort of look at, but don't realize that we're all a part of it. You know, the atmosphere is something that joins everybody, every place on the globe. And not just the people, but the animals, everything. So when you're in that environment and you're looking out, it's possible to imagine really any place on the globe. You're a part of that. There's nothing that is separating you from that part.
America's story was rewritten the moment we took to the skies, and nowhere is that legacy clearer than at Seattle's Museum of Flight. Now be sure and head over to our YouTube page and you can watch the full video tour of the museum. You can also catch us on Facebook and Instagram for behind the scenes content. On the Road with Kelly and Bob, the USA 250 tour. Be sure and tune in wherever you get your podcast or download that free Odyssey app. Listen anytime, anywhere.